Does Queen Elizabeth have a favorite grandchild? Reportedly, the answer is yes, and it's Lady Louise Windsor. Here's why she's being called the future of the royal family. While Lady Louise Windsor has mostly lived her life out of the spotlight, she entered the world in a bit of a frenzy.
What if the quietest granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth was always the one she trusted most? Lady Louise Windsor spent her summers at a garden center, not in palace ballrooms. While the world watched Harry leave,
in what promises to be an explosive interview, Prince Harry compares leaving life as a working royal
and William prepare for the crown, Louise sat beside her grandmother, privately, quietly, and purposefully. Queen Elizabeth made choices before she died that nobody expected. Choices that left Camilla's family furious, to choices that skipped the powerful and landed on the one nobody was watching. A 22-year-old girl, a private estate, a royal family now divided behind closed doors. The palace never wanted this story told. Stay with us, because what happened next will change everything you thought you knew. The girl nobody was watching. Lady Louise Windsor is 22 years old. She is the granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, though most people don't even know her name, and that is exactly how she preferred it. While her cousins, Prince William and Prince Harry, were on every magazine cover and every news headline, Louise was living a different kind of life. She worked a summer job at a garden center near Windsor. She studied English at the University of St. Andrews, the same university where Prince William met Kate Middleton 2 decades ago. No drama, no scandals, no press tours. Just a young woman quietly building her life away from the cameras. But here's what nobody tells you. That quiet life was not by accident. Her parents, Prince Edward and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, made a deliberate choice. They wanted their children to grow up as normal as possible. Sophie once told reporters that Louise and her brother James would likely have to work for a living rather than rely on royal privileges. So that kind of honesty, that kind of groundedness is rare inside Buckingham Palace. And Queen Elizabeth noticed every bit of it. But before any of this, Louise's story started in a very difficult place. She was born on November 8, 2003, not in the calm, planned way royal births usually happen. Her mother, Sophie, was rushed to Frimley Park Hospital after a sudden placental abruption. Her father, Prince Edward, was traveling abroad and missed her birth entirely. And Louise arrived through an emergency C-section, and both mother and baby faced serious blood loss. The tiny premature baby was transferred to the neonatal unit at St. George's Hospital in London. She was fragile, she was small, and the Queen was deeply worried. That early fear created something between Elizabeth and Louise that never fully went away, a protectiveness, a tenderness that the Queen did not show in the same way toward her older grandchildren. And Louise also grew up with a condition called esotropia, which caused her eyes to misalign, and she had multiple surgeries as a child. None of this was ever made into a public story. The family kept it private, and Louise grew up shielded from the kind of media attention that had followed William and Harry since birth. Palace insiders shared that the Queen had a special fondness for Louise. She would drive to Edward and Sophie's home near Windsor, just to sit with the children and watch television together. A palace staff member once quietly told a royal journalist that the Queen would visit them to watch the children's show Mr. Tumble sitting on the sofa. No cameras, no duties, just a grandmother with her grandchildren. She also let Louise view Queen Victoria's private sketches from the Scottish Highlands drawings that were rarely shown to anyone outside the immediate family. Louise had shown an early talent for art, and Elizabeth recognized it and quietly encouraged it. This was not a casual relationship. And those mental notes made over 2 decades of quiet visits and private moments eventually shaped the most important decisions Elizabeth made before she died. Philip's final gift. Before we get to Queen Elizabeth's estate, and we need to talk about what Prince Philip left behind because it tells you everything about how this family saw Lady Louise. When Prince Philip passed away on April 9, 2021 at the age of 99,
The Queen has announced the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness.
His funeral at Windsor Castle had a deeply personal moment. 2 fell ponies, Balmoral Nevis and Knotlaw Storm, stood quietly beside a dark green carriage. On the seat of that carriage were Philip's driving gloves, his cap, a whip, and a small red tub of sugar lumps for his horses. These were not just objects, and they were the symbols of 40 years of a man's passion. Philip had taken up competitive carriage driving in 1971 after arthritis ended his polo career.
Prince Philip to watch the polo match for the Festival Cup. This was between a team from Argentina.
He went on to represent Great Britain in 6 World Championships and 3 European Championships. He was still competing well into his 80s. The carriage that carried his coffin at his funeral was the very one he had designed himself, built to his exact specifications. And he left all of it to Lady Louise. Now think about what that actually means. Philip had 4 children. He had 8 grandchildren. He had decades of relationships, friendships, and royal connections. And when it came time to decide who would carry forward the thing he loved most, the sport that had defined the second half of his life, he chose a 17-year-old girl who most of the world had never heard of. That choice was not random. It was deliberate. Philip had personally taught Louise to drive a carriage during her teenage years. And the 2 of them spent hours together in Windsor Great Park, just the 2 of them, working through the techniques, learning the rhythm of the horses, building something that had nothing to do with titles or public duties. Her mother, Sophie, said in a 2020 interview that Louise had a natural talent for the sport. But talent alone does not explain the bond. Philip was not the kind of man who gave his time easily. He was disciplined, direct, and selective about who he invested in. The fact that he chose to spend those quiet hours with Louise says more than any formal announcement ever could. In 2019, Philip sat in the stands at the Royal Windsor Horse Show and watched Louise compete in the private driving singles category. She placed 3rd. The people around him that day said his pride was impossible to miss. 2 years later, he was gone. After his death, Louise did not put the carriages in storage. She drove them. In 2022, just a few months before Queen Elizabeth's own passing, Louise drove one of Philip's carriages at the Royal Windsor Horse Show. She led the parade while the Queen watched from the stands.
Queen Elizabeth was all smiles at the Royal Windsor Horse Show. In her first public appearance in weeks, the 96-year-old monarch.
People who were there that day say Elizabeth had tears in her eyes. There is something quietly powerful about that image. A grandmother watching her granddaughter carry forward her late husband's legacy in public, on the same grounds where Philip had competed for decades. No speech was needed. No announcement. And the carriage moving around that track said everything. By 2024, Louise competed at the British National Carriage Driving Championships and placed 2nd in her class, a statement of identity. She was not just borrowing Philip's sport, she was making it her own. This inheritance from Philip was the first signal. The second signal came from Elizabeth herself, and it shook the palace in ways nobody expected. The estate. Nobody expected here is something most people don't understand about the British royal family, and it matters a lot for this story. Not all royal wealth belongs to the crown. There is a very important difference between what belongs to the monarchy as an institution and what belongs to the Queen as a private person. It belongs to the monarchy, not to any individual monarch. When one ruler dies, it automatically passes to the next. While Queen Elizabeth had no personal say in what happened to those assets, but Elizabeth also had her own private fortune, estimated at around £500 million at the time of her death.
Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. In a statement, the palace said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon.
This personal wealth was entirely hers to decide about. It included Balmoral Castle in Scotland, valued at approximately £80 million. It included the Sandringham estate in Norfolk, worth around £250 million. And it included over 300 pieces of fine personal jewelry, a private collection of racehorses, a car collection, and investment portfolios that some analysts estimated could be worth over £100 million when adjusted for growth. To put that in plain terms, Elizabeth was not just the head of a monarchy. She was also a very wealthy private individual who had full legal control over what happened to her personal assets after her death. Most people assume that when a monarch dies, everything simply transfers to the next king or queen. That is not how it works. The institutional assets, the palaces, the crown jewels, the official residences, yes, those pass automatically. But the private wealth? That is a different matter entirely. Elizabeth could leave specific items, properties, or portions of her estate to whoever she chose. And a 1993 legal agreement with the British government ensured that transfers between monarchs happened without the standard 40% inheritance tax. When her estate passed to King Charles, it moved in full and without deductions. But here is the part the palace did not advertise. Before that transfer happened, Elizabeth spent the final years of her life quietly reviewing her most personal possessions, her jewelry, her private keepsakes, items with deep sentimental value, and making decisions about where they should go. A source close to the palace told Radar Online in July 2022, just 2 months before Elizabeth's death, that she had been going through her belongings carefully and determining who truly deserved what. The source described last-minute changes to her will that would genuinely catch the House of Windsor off guard. This was not an old woman passively letting lawyers handle paperwork. This was Elizabeth, a woman who had managed one of the world's most complex institutions for 70 years, making deliberate, considered, personal choices about her legacy. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew who had been loyal. She knew who had shown up. And she knew who had quietly earned her trust over decades of private moments that never made the news. The surprises in her will were not accidents. They were decisions, and they were already beginning to surface. Camilla's fury. The first major shock involved Queen Elizabeth's personal jewelry collection, over 300 pieces. It with the most prized ones valued at around $110 million combined. Elizabeth chose to leave the majority of those pieces to Catherine, Princess of Wales, not to Camilla. This was not a small decision. Camilla had been married to King Charles since 2005. She had been officially named future Queen Consort. Many inside and outside the palace expected her to receive significant personal gifts from Elizabeth's estate. That is not what happened. See, an insider told Radar Online that Kate was clearly the family favorite in Elizabeth's eyes. The source added that Camilla never said it out loud, but this was one reason she quietly resented Kate. But the jewelry was only part of it. The larger issue for Camilla was the pattern it revealed. Elizabeth was not distributing her wealth equally. She was making pointed personal choices that showed exactly who she felt closest to, and Camilla's side of the family was not on that list. And Camilla has 2 children from her first marriage, Tom Parker Bowles a food critic and author,
I love going to places like Thailand, and it's dishes. For me, the food on the street gets me more excited.
and Laura Lopes. Neither of them carries royal blood. Both of them watch from a distance as the Windsor family makes decisions about inheritance, titles, and legacy. Tom Parker Bowles has become a more visible presence at royal events in recent years, and some European media have speculated that he could benefit from King Charles's future will. But that depends entirely on Charles, not on anything Elizabeth left behind. Reports have also emerged that Camilla has been trying to influence King Charles's own will, particularly to reduce Prince Harry's share and increase what her son Tom might receive. Whether those efforts are succeeding is something the palace has not confirmed, but the tension is real, and insiders say it runs deep. And at the center of that tension is Lady Louise, a girl who carries royal blood, who was quietly loved by both Elizabeth and Philip, and who has now received meaningful personal inheritances from both of them. For Camilla's family, watching that happen is not just about money. It is about belonging. The soldier nobody saw coming. While the inheritance story was unfolding, Lady Louise was building a different kind of future for herself. In September 2022, just days after Queen Elizabeth's death,
A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth.
Louise arrived at the University of St. Andrews to begin studying English. The timing was not lost on royal watchers. She was starting her adult life at the same moment the family was grieving and reorganizing itself. Then, in 2024, she did something that surprised everyone. She joined the Tayforth University Officer Training Corps, a British Army Reserve unit. Photos emerged of her in full military gear face paint, helmet marked with the name Windsor Training, alongside her fellow students. By 2025, she had become an officer cadet in the Army Reserve. Royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams noted that Louise carries traits from both of her grandparents. She is shy and private like the Queen. She is disciplined and competitive like Philip. Her LinkedIn profile, which she maintains quietly, points toward interests in the military, diplomacy, or law. There is a historical echo here that royal watchers find meaningful. Queen Elizabeth herself began her public duties at age 16, inspecting troops at Windsor Castle during World War II. At 18, she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service and became the first female royal to actively serve in the armed forces. Louise's path, beginning with carriage driving and now moving into military training, feels like a deliberate alignment with her grandmother's example. This matters for the royal family's future. Currently, there are only 4 working royals under the age of 70. The question of who steps up to fill the gap has been quietly discussed in palace circles for years. So Louise's name keeps coming up, and the palace, for once, does not seem to be discouraging that conversation. She is 17th in line for the throne. She has chosen not to take the title of Her Royal Highness, a decision that shows unusual humility for someone in her position. And yet, despite stepping away from formal titles, she is moving closer to the center of the monarchy, not through politics or publicity, but through service. Lady Louise Windsor did not ask for any of this, and she did not campaign for inheritances, titles, or public attention. She went to work at a garden center. She drove a carriage in her grandfather's memory. She put on military gear and trained in the rain. And quietly, without announcement, she became the royal the Queen trusted most. What Elizabeth left her, and what it revealed about Camilla, is a story about loyalty, love, and what really matters inside the world's most watched family. The palace would rather you forget this story. But now you know it. If this gave you something to think about, share it with someone who follows the royals. And stay with us, because the next chapter of Louise's story is only just beginning.